The CEO boss answered a midnight call. "She's dying, sir, and you're the last name she spoke." Richard Harrington's eyes snapped open at the harsh buzzing of his phone against the glass nightstand. The blue glow illuminated his luxurious bedroom suite, casting eerie shadows across the expanse of his king-sized bed. 3:27 in the morning. No good news ever came at this hour. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail, but 20 years of business instinct told him otherwise. CEOs of multinational corporations didn't have the luxury of ignoring midnight calls. "Harrington," he answered, his voice still rough with sleep. "Mr. Harrington, I'm sorry to disturb you." The woman's voice was professional but tinged with unmistakable urgency. "This is Nurse Kendall from Mercy General Hospital." Richard sat up straighter, suddenly alert. His mind raced through possibilities. His parents were both gone, his brother lived overseas but was in perfect health, and his daughter Megan was sleeping safely in her room down the hall. "There's been an accident," the nurse continued. "A woman was brought in about an hour ago. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding. She's in critical condition, sir." "I'm sorry to hear that," Richard said cautiously, "but I don't understand why you're calling me." The pause that followed seemed to stretch into infinity. "She's dying, sir, and you're the last name she spoke." A cold wave washed over Richard, his hand tightening around the phone. "Who is she?" "A woman named Elise Wilson." The name hit him like a physical blow. Richard's free hand clutched at the sheets as memories he'd buried 15 years ago crashed through the carefully constructed walls of his mind. "Mr. Harrington, are you there?" "Yes," he managed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He moved on autopilot, pulling on jeans and a sweater in the dark. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble as he scribbled a note for his housekeeper, who would arrive at 6 to prepare breakfast for Megan before school. "Emergency at the office. Please get Megan ready for school. I'll call later." RH. A lie, but a necessary one. How could he explain the truth when he barely understood it himself? Elise Wilson. A name he had forced himself not to think about for a decade and a half. The woman who had once meant everything to him and who he had ultimately betrayed in the worst possible way. The drive to Mercy General passed in a blur. Richard's hands gripped the steering wheel of his Aston Martin so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The late October rain pelted against the windshield, and occasional lightning illuminated the deserted streets of the city he now effectively owned. 15 years ago, Richard had been an ambitious young executive at Apex Industries, a mid-sized tech company with potential but plagued by mismanagement. Elise had been the brilliant lead software engineer, creative, passionate, and utterly dedicated to her work. Their connection had been immediate and intense, both professionally and personally. Together they had developed Continuum, a revolutionary data integration platform that would eventually become the foundation of Richard's business empire. But that was before the takeover, before the choices that defined his career and shattered whatever had been growing between them. The hospital's emergency entrance was bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Richard parked haphazardly and strode through the automatic doors, his usual commanding presence drawing immediate attention. "I'm Richard Harrington. I received a call about Elise Wilson." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at his name. He was, after all, one of the city's most prominent citizens and largest philanthropic donors, before she quickly composed herself. "Yes, Mr. Harrington, please follow me." She led him through the maze of corridors to a small private waiting area. A doctor in scrubs approached, her face grave. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Dr. Taylor. Thank you for coming so quickly. How is she?" The words felt strange in his mouth, asking about a woman he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Critical, but stable for the moment. She was in a car accident, hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. She has multiple internal injuries and has already undergone emergency surgery. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Richard nodded, absorbing the information. "The nurse said I was the last name she spoke." Dr. Taylor's expression softened slightly. "Yes. When she was brought in, she was conscious briefly. She asked for you specifically. She said it was important, something about the truth and grace." Grace. Another name from the past, another sharp pain in his chest. "Can I see her?" "Briefly. She's unconscious and will likely remain so for some time. We've induced a medical coma to help her body heal." Richard followed the doctor through more corridors until they reached the ICU. Through the glass he could see Elise, surrounded by machines, tubes and monitors. Her face was badly bruised, partially covered by an oxygen mask. She looked small and broken, nothing like the vibrant, fierce woman who had once challenged him at every turn and made him a better man in the process. "What are her chances?" he asked quietly. "It's too early to say definitively. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical." Richard nodded, his throat tight. "I'd like to stay." "Of course, I'll have someone bring you some coffee." After the doctor left, Richard entered the room and sank into the chair beside Elise's bed. He stared at her battered face, trying to reconcile this broken woman with the Elise he had known. Brilliant, passionate, with a laugh that could illuminate an entire room. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence as Richard's mind whirled with questions. Why had Elise asked for him after all this time? What truth was she referring to? And Grace, was it possible she meant their Grace? As dawn broke, casting pale light through the hospital window, Richard remained at Elise's bedside, his thoughts a turbulent sea of memories, regrets and questions. His phone had buzzed several times, messages from his executive assistant, his board chair, even one from Megan asking why he wasn't at breakfast. He replied only to his daughter, reassuring her that everything was fine and that he'd see her that evening. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. A nurse entered, different from the one who had called. "Mr. Harrington, there's someone asking to see Ms. Wilson. A young woman named Amelia Parker. She says she's Ms. Wilson's assistant." Richard hesitated. He didn't recognize the name, but then why would he? 15 years had passed. Elise had built a life he knew nothing about. "Send her in," he decided. Moments later, a young woman with coppery hair pulled back in a severe bun entered the room. She stopped short when she saw Richard, her eyes widening in recognition. "You're Richard Harrington," she stated, her tone accusatory rather than impressed. "I am. And you're Elise's assistant?" "Yes. She's my boss at Solstice Innovations." Amelia's gaze shifted to Elise's still form, and her professional composure cracked. "The hospital called me as her emergency contact. They said she asked for you before they put her under. I don't understand why she would do that." The bitterness in the young woman's voice was unmistakable. Richard raised an eyebrow. "You know who I am in relation to Elise. Everyone at Solstice knows the story, Mr. Harrington. How you stole her technology and pushed her out of Apex 15 years ago. How you built Harrington Tech on the foundation of her work while she had to start over from nothing." Richard felt the familiar weight of guilt, heavier now in this sterile room with Elise fighting for her life just feet away. The official history of Harrington Tech made no mention of Elise Wilson. The world believed Continuum was solely his creation, the breakthrough that had transformed him from ambitious executive to tech visionary. Only a handful of people knew the truth, or at least parts of it. "The situation was more complicated than that," Richard said quietly. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Complicated enough that she never speaks your name? That the mere mention of Harrington Tech in meetings makes her go completely silent? Whatever happened between you two, it destroyed something in her." Before Richard could respond, his phone buzzed again. His daughter. With a silent apology to Elise, he stepped out of the room to take the call. "Dad, what's going on?" "Mrs. Brian said you had an emergency at the office, but Janie said her dad told her there was an accident and you're at the hospital. Are you okay?" Richard closed his eyes. News traveled fast in their social circle, even at 7 in the morning. "I'm fine, sweetheart. An old colleague was in an accident. I'm just making sure everything's being handled properly." "Is it someone I know?" The innocent question sent a tremor through Richard. "No, Megan. Someone from a long time ago." As he ended the call with his daughter, promising again to be home for dinner, Richard couldn't help but wonder how much longer he could keep the past separated from his present. With Elise lying critically injured and her assistant clearly hostile toward him, the carefully constructed narrative of his life seemed suddenly fragile. Whatever truth Elise wanted to reveal, whatever she meant by mentioning Grace, Richard knew one thing with absolute certainty. His world was about to change irrevocably. Richard returned to Elise's room to find Amelia sitting at her bedside, her posture rigid with tension. The morning sun now fully illuminated the sterile space, casting everything in harsh clarity. The machines keeping Elise alive, the dark circles under Amelia's eyes, and the unmistakable hostility in her gaze as she looked up at him. "You should go, Mr. Harrington," Amelia said quietly. "I'll stay with her." "I can't do that." Richard moved to the opposite side of the bed, studying Elise's face. Despite the bruises and tubes, he could see the woman he had known. 15 years had added fine lines around her eyes, and a few strands of silver in her dark hair. But she was still undeniably Elise. "Not until I understand why she asked for me," Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps to finally confront you after all these years." Richard met her gaze steadily. "There are things you don't know about my history with Elise." "I know enough. I know she founded Solstice Innovations from scratch while battling depression. I know she works 18-hour days and has virtually no personal life. I know she flinches whenever your company is mentioned in the news." Amelia leaned forward. "And I know that whatever happened between you two nearly destroyed her." The accusation hung in the air between them, neither willing to back down. The tense silence was broken by the arrival of Dr. Taylor, who checked Elise's vitals and made notes on her chart. "Any change?" Richard asked. "Her vitals are stable, which is a good sign. We'll be running more tests throughout the day." The doctor glanced between Richard and Amelia, clearly sensing the tension. "Are either of you family?" "No," they answered simultaneously. "I'm her executive assistant," Amelia added. "Her emergency contact. She doesn't have family, at least none that she's in contact with." This detail surprised Richard. The Elise he had known had been close to her parents, especially her father. "Her parents?" he asked. Amelia shrugged. "Her father died about 10 years ago. Her mother has Alzheimer's, lives in a facility upstate. Elise visits every Sunday without fail, even though her mother rarely recognizes her anymore." Another weight of guilt settled on Richard's shoulders. He hadn't known about Elise's father, hadn't been there when she lost him. "Mr. Harrington, while we have you both here," Dr. Taylor said, "did Ms. Wilson ever mention any medical directives, in case decisions need to be made about her care?" "I have copies of her legal documents at the office," Amelia said. "I can have them sent over." "That would be helpful, thank you." After the doctor left, Richard checked his watch. 8:30. By now, his absence from the office would be causing speculation. Harrington Tech employed over 20,000 people worldwide, and its CEO didn't simply disappear without explanation. "I need to make some calls," he said. "I'll be back." In the hospital corridor, Richard called his executive assistant, Barbara, who had been with him since the founding of Harrington Tech. She was one of the few who knew parts of the truth about Elise. "Barbara, I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. Family emergency." "Megan!" Alarm sharpened her voice. "No, Megan's fine. It's Elise Wilson is in the hospital, critical condition." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "I see," Barbara finally responded. "And you're with her?" "Yes, she asked for me specifically. I need to understand why." Another pause. "Richard, are you sure this is wise? After all this time, I don't have a choice. And Barbara, I need you to pull everything we have on Solstice Innovations, discreetly." "Of course. Should I tell the board anything specific?" "Just that I'm dealing with a personal matter. I'll check in for the Johnson merger call tomorrow." As Richard ended the call, he spotted Amelia leaving Elise's room, phone in hand. She stopped when she saw him. "I need to go to the office to get those documents for the doctor," she said stiffly. "I suppose you'll be staying?" Richard nodded. "Amelia, what did Elise tell you about me? About what happened at Apex?" She hesitated, studying him. "Not much, actually. Just that you were partners developing Continuum, and then suddenly you weren't. She had to sign away her rights to the technology, and you went on to become a billionaire while she started over with nothing." Amelia tilted her head. "The details are something of a mystery. She refuses to discuss it." "I see. One thing I do know," Amelia added, "is that she keeps a locked file in her office labeled Grace Project. No one knows what it contains, and she never speaks of it." Grace. Again, that name. Richard's heart hammered in his chest. "Thank you for telling me." Amelia's expression softened slightly. "Despite what you might think, I care about Elise. She saved my career when no one else would give me a chance. If there's something in her past, your past together, that's important enough for her to ask for you while dying, then I want to understand it too." After Amelia left, Richard returned to Elise's bedside. Alone with her for the first time in 15 years, memories flooded back. Her brilliant mind, her infectious enthusiasm when solving a particularly challenging problem, the way she'd unconsciously tuck her hair behind her ear when concentrating. And then, the darker memories. The corporate takeover, the ultimatum from Marcus Bennett, the impossible choice Richard had faced, and the look of absolute betrayal in Elise's eyes when he'd chosen his ambition over her, over them. "Why now, Elise?" he whispered to her still form. "After all this time, why reach out now?" The steady beeping of the monitors was his only answer. Hours passed. Richard worked remotely from his tablet, postponing meetings and reviewing quarterly projections, all while his mind churned with questions about the past and what Elise might know about Grace. Shortly after noon, Barbara called with information about Solstice Innovations. "It's a privately held company specializing in secure database architecture," she reported. "Annual revenue around 40 million. Respectable but tiny compared to us. They've developed a reputation for ethical data handling practices and have a loyal client base in healthcare and education. Any financial troubles, potential buyout targets? Not that I can see. They're stable with consistent growth. Elise Wilson is listed as founder and CEO with a controlling interest. And no mention of any project called Grace. Nothing in public records. Should I dig deeper?" Richard hesitated. "No, not yet." As he ended the call, Dr. Taylor returned with news. "We've completed additional scans. The swelling in her brain has begun to subside, which is an excellent sign. If this continues, we'll consider bringing her out of the induced coma tomorrow." Relief washed over Richard. "So she's going to recover?" "Barring complications, her prognosis is improving." "She's a fighter." "That she is," Richard murmured. When Amelia returned with Elise's legal documents, she found Richard still at Elise's bedside, lost in thought. "You're still here," she observed, surprise evident in her voice. "I told you I would be." Amelia handed the medical directives to a nurse, then sat across from Richard. "I brought something else," she said, placing a small thumb drive on the side table. "I found this in Elise's office safe, in the file marked Grace Project. I've never seen it before, never even knew the safe existed until today." Richard stared at the thumb drive. "You're giving this to me. I don't know what's on it, but I think it's what she would want, given that she asked for you." Amelia's expression hardened. "Whatever history you two share, she's my mentor and the best boss I've ever had. If anything happens to her, I understand," Richard interjected. "And I appreciate your trust." "I don't trust you, Mr. Harrington. But I trust Elise's judgment, even when she's barely conscious." Richard pocketed the thumb drive, the weight of it seemingly disproportionate to its size. Whatever information it contained, Elise had kept it secure and separate from her regular work. The implications were both intriguing and terrifying. As evening approached, Richard reluctantly prepared to leave. He had promised Megan he would be home for dinner, and he wouldn't break that promise. His daughter had already lost her mother. He refused to become an absent father as well. "Will you be back?" Amelia asked as they both prepared to depart. "First thing tomorrow," Richard confirmed. "If there's any change, I'll call you," she promised, surprising him with the lack of hostility in her voice. At home, Richard maintained a facade of normalcy through dinner with Megan, discussing her day at school and her upcoming debate tournament. At 16, Megan was remarkably perceptive, so much like her mother in her intelligence and determination. Several times, she gave him questioning looks but didn't press when he deflected her concerns about his work emergency. After Megan retired to her room to study, Richard retreated to his home office, the thumb drive burning a hole in his pocket. Whatever was on it, he needed to know before Elise regained consciousness. The drive was encrypted, requiring a password. Richard tried various combinations. Elise's birthday, the date Continuum was first conceived, even the name Grace, all unsuccessfully. Finally, on a hunch, he tried the date everything had fallen apart, June 17th, 2010. The drive unlocked. A single folder appeared, labeled simply Truth. Inside was a document titled, "For Richard, if something happens to me," and a subfolder named Grace Evidence. Richard's hand trembled as he clicked on the document. The first line froze the blood in his veins. "Richard, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or incapacitated. What you're about to learn will change everything you think you know about what happened 15 years ago. More importantly, it will change everything you know about Grace, the name of their stillborn daughter." Richard stared at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. Grace, their daughter. or so he had believed, who had never taken a breath in this world. The devastating loss that had driven the final wedge between him and Elise, even before the corporate betrayal that followed. With shaking hands, he continued reading. What Marcus Bennett told you about Grace wasn't true. The story about complications during delivery, about her being stillborn, it was all fabricated. I didn't discover the truth until years later, and by then, you had become untouchable. Harrington Tech was a global powerhouse, and I was still rebuilding my life from the ashes. Richard's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't possible. He'd seen the death certificate, had stood beside Elise at the tiny grave in the cemetery. They had both been devastated, their relationship already strained by the pressures of the Apex takeover negotiations. You need to examine the evidence in the attached folder. DNA tests, hospital records I've managed to obtain, financial transactions. It took me years to piece it all together, but the conclusion is undeniable. Grace didn't die that day, Richard. Bennett arranged for her to be taken and placed with an adoptive family. Our daughter is alive. Jesus Christ, Richard whispered, the room suddenly spinning around him. He gripped the edge of his desk, trying to steady himself. It couldn't be true. And yet, why would Elise lie about something so monumental? Marcus Bennett had been the CEO of Centaur Capital, the investment firm that had orchestrated the hostile takeover of Apex Industries. He had been ruthless, manipulative, and determined to acquire the Continuum technology at any cost. He had also been the one to bring Richard the news about Grace's death, while Elise was still sedated after the traumatic delivery. With trembling fingers, Richard opened the Grace evidence folder. Inside were scanned documents, spreadsheets of financial transactions, and several surveillance photos. He spent the next hour meticulously reviewing everything, his executive mind cataloguing the evidence, while his heart threatened to burst from the implications. Hospital records showed a healthy delivery, contradicting the stillbirth story. Financial records revealed a $2 million payment to the head obstetrician who had overseen Elise's delivery. Most damning of all were the adoption papers, filed 3 days after Grace's supposed death, for a baby girl born on the exact same date. The pieces fit together with horrifying clarity. Bennett had wanted complete control of Continuum, but both Richard and Elise held crucial patents. By separating them, using their daughter as leverage, he had isolated Richard, making him vulnerable to the manipulative offer that followed. Sign over Elise's portion of the rights to Continuum in exchange for Richard retaining his own stake and a leadership position in the new company. At the time, grief-stricken and believing Elise blamed him for the stress that had supposedly contributed to their daughter's death, Richard had made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He had betrayed the woman he loved, rationalizing that the technology they had created together would at least survive and thrive under his guidance. Now, 15 years later, he discovered it had all been built on a foundation of lies. But one critical question remained unanswered. Where was Grace now? Richard scrolled further through the document. I've traced her to a family in Seattle. James and Margaret Winters adopted her as an infant and named her Sophia. She's 15 now, Richard. Our daughter is 15 years old, healthy and thriving according to my sources. I've included recent photos, but I've never approached her or the Winters family. That decision needs to involve you. Attached were several photographs of a teenage girl with dark hair and a familiar smile. Elise's smile, but her eyes. Those were unmistakably Richard's eyes. The resemblance to Megan, her half-sister, was striking. Richard sat back, overwhelmed. Grace, Sophia, was alive. He had another daughter he had never known, growing up just a few hours away by plane, and Elise had discovered this earth-shattering truth, but hadn't contacted him until now, on what might have been her deathbed. The document continued. I've debated for years whether to tell you. After what happened at Apex, after you chose Bennett and your ambitions over us, I wanted to hate you forever. But hatred is exhausting, Richard. And our daughter deserves to know the truth about where she came from, when the time is right. Recently, I've received concerning information that Bennett may know I've uncovered the truth. My home was broken into last month, though nothing obvious was taken. My office computer was remotely accessed despite our security protocols. I fear he may take action to ensure this secret remains buried. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Bennett has too much to lose if this comes to light. His reputation, possibly his freedom. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on kidnapping. Richard checked the date on the document. It had been updated just 3 days ago. The car accident suddenly took on a sinister dimension. Was it truly a drunk driver or something more calculated? His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Amelia's name flashed on the screen. "Has something changed?" he asked immediately. "No, she's stable," Amelia assured him. "But there's a man here asking questions about Elise. He says he's from Centaur Capital's legal department." Richard's blood ran cold. "What's his name?" "David Lynch. Do you know him?" "He's Bennett's personal attorney." Richard's mind raced. "Don't tell him anything. I'm on my way back to the hospital." "Mr. Harrington, it's almost midnight. This can't wait. And Amelia, be careful. We may be dealing with something far more dangerous than a car accident." 30 minutes later, Richard strode through the hospital entrance, his face set in the hard expression that had earned him the nickname the Steel CEO in business circles. He had left a note for Megan and his housekeeper, explaining another emergency had arisen. He found Amelia outside Elise's room, looking tense. Lynch left about 10 minutes ago. He wanted to know if Elise had regained consciousness and if she had spoken to anyone before the accident. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific. I said I'd only arrived after she was already in a coma." Amelia studied his face. "What's happening? You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard hesitated, weighing how much to share. "The thumb drive contained some disturbing information about Marcus Bennett, information that would ruin him if it became public. I believe Elise's accident may not have been an accident at all." Amelia's eyes widened. "Are you saying someone tried to kill her?" "It's a possibility we need to consider. Bennett is a powerful man with resources at his disposal." "Shouldn't we go to the police?" "Not yet. We need more concrete evidence." Richard glanced toward Elise's room. "Any change in her condition?" "The nurses said her latest readings show improvement. They're optimistic about bringing her out of the coma tomorrow." Relief flooded through Richard, immediately followed by apprehension. If Bennett's people were already sniffing around, Elise would be in danger the moment she regained consciousness. "We need to arrange private security," he decided, "and we need to move her to a different room, preferably under a different name." To her credit, Amelia didn't question his judgment. "I'll speak to the hospital administration. Your name carries enough weight to make it happen quickly." While Amelia handled the logistics, Richard sat at Elise's bedside, studying her face in the dim light. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping, the only sound in the quiet room. "I know about Grace," he whispered, taking Elise's hand gently. "I know what Bennett did to us, to our family. I'm so sorry I didn't trust you, didn't fight for you both." His throat tightened with emotion. 15 years of built-up regret, anger, and loss threatened to overwhelm him. He had constructed his life around the narrative that Elise had pushed him away after Grace's death, that he had made the only choice available to salvage their work. The truth was far more painful. He had been manipulated by a master strategist who had identified his ambition as his greatest weakness. By morning, they had successfully moved Elise to a secure private room under the name Elizabeth Warren, with 2 security guards from Harrington Tech's executive protection team stationed outside. Richard had called Barbara again, instructing her to gather everything they had on Marcus Bennett's current activities and whereabouts. As dawn broke, Dr. Taylor arrived to examine Elise. "Her condition has improved significantly overnight. We'll begin the process of bringing her out of the coma this morning. It may take several hours for her to regain consciousness. I'll be here," Richard assured her. When the doctor left, Amelia returned with coffee for both of them. She looked exhausted, but determined. "I did some digging last night," she said, settling into a chair. 2 months ago, Elise met with a private investigator. She didn't tell me why, but she seemed anxious afterward. Then last week, she updated her will and gave me specific instructions about secure files in her home office if anything happened to her. Did she mention the name Grace or Sophia? Amelia shook her head. No. But she did say something odd. She said, "Sometimes family finds you when you least expect it." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. Richard's phone buzzed with a message from Barbara. "Bennett flying in from NYC this morning. Scheduled meeting at Centaur offices at 11 a.m. Bennett was coming to town. The same day Elise was expected to regain consciousness. The timing couldn't be coincidental. "We need to prepare for what happens when she wakes up," Richard said grimly. "Bennett won't stop at one attempt if he believes his secret is in jeopardy." "What secret could possibly be worth killing for?" Amelia asked. Richard met her gaze steadily. "The kind that would destroy a man's legacy and possibly send him to prison for decades." As he spoke, Elise's fingers twitched in his hand. The first voluntary movement since the accident. Both Richard and Amelia froze, watching intently as her eyelids began to flutter. After 15 years of separation built on lies and manipulation, Richard was about to face the woman whose life he had inadvertently helped destroy, and together they would need to protect the daughter neither of them had been allowed to know. Elise's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening as awareness returned. Her gaze drifted around the unfamiliar room before settling on Richard's face. For a moment there was no recognition, just confusion. Then her eyes widened. "Richard?" Her voice was barely audible, rough from disuse and the intubation tube that had been removed earlier. "I'm here, Elise." He leaned closer, still holding her hand. "You're in the hospital. There was an accident." She closed her eyes briefly, as if processing this information. When she opened them again, urgency filled her expression. "Grace," she whispered, "did you—" "I found the drive," Richard confirmed quietly. "I know everything." Relief washed over her features, immediately followed by alarm. "Bennett is flying in today. We've moved you to a secure room under a different name. There are guards outside." Amelia stepped forward, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. "Elise, thank God you're awake." Elise's gaze shifted to her assistant, a weak smile forming. "Amelia, always so efficient." "I'll get the doctor," Amelia said, squeezing Elise's hand before stepping out. Alone with Richard, Elise struggled to form words, her throat dry and raw. He helped her sip water through a straw, supporting her head gently. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Since they called me, the night of the accident." A shadow crossed her face. "Not an accident. Car forced off the road, black SUV." Richard's jaw tightened, confirmation of what he had already suspected. "We'll need to report this to the police." "Evidence first," Elise insisted. "My apartment, safe behind the bookcase. Code is Grace's birthday." Richard nodded, understanding immediately. April 22nd, 2010, a date etched permanently in both their memories. Dr. Taylor entered with Amelia, cutting short their conversation. After examining Elise and expressing satisfaction with her progress, the doctor cautioned that she needed rest and limited excitement. 1 hour of visiting time. Then she needs to rest, she instructed before leaving. Elise waited until the door closed. "Richard, you need to understand. I only discovered the truth 3 years ago. Private investigator specializes in adoption fraud." "Why didn't you come to me immediately?" The question that had been burning in his mind since reading her document. Pain flickered across her features. "Would you have believed me? After everything, the way we ended?" She took a labored breath. "Bennett had convinced you I was unstable, grieving mother, imagining conspiracies." The accusation stung because it contained truth. In the aftermath of Grace's supposed death and the Apex takeover, Bennett had indeed planted seeds, suggesting Elise's judgment was compromised by grief and stress. "I would have listened," Richard insisted, though uncertainty colored his tone. "Perhaps," Elise conceded, "but I needed proof first. Incontrovertible evidence. And now you have it. Yes, financial records, witness testimonies, DNA confirmation." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Our daughter is alive, Richard. She's been living 20 minutes from your corporate headquarters." The revelation struck him anew. "The Winters family. Have you made contact?" Elise shook her head slightly. "Observed from distance only. They're good people. Sophia is thriving. Honor student. Plays violin." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Like you used to." Richard's throat constricted with emotion. He had abandoned the violin when his career took off, one of many personal interests sacrificed on the altar of success. "What's the plan now?" he asked. "Bennett knows you've uncovered the truth." "Evidence package with my lawyer," Elise explained. "Instructions to release to FBI if anything happens to me. But I needed you to know first." "Why now, after all these years?" Elise's eyes grew distant. "Sophia turned 15 last month. Same age I was when my father taught me truth always matters, no matter the cost." Her voice strengthened. "She deserves to know where she came from, and you deserve to know your daughter lives." The door opened and Amelia returned, her expression tense. "Mr. Harrington, there's a call for you at the nurse's station. Your executive assistant says it's urgent." Richard reluctantly left Elise's side, following Amelia to the desk where he accepted the phone. "Barbara? Richard, Bennett's people are looking for you. They've been to your office and your home." "Megan called me. Someone claimed to be from your security team tried to question her about your whereabouts." Ice formed in Richard's veins. "Is she safe?" "Yes. Your regular security recognized the imposters. They've moved her to the lake house as a precaution." "Good. Keep her there until I say otherwise." Richard's mind raced. Bennett's getting desperate. He knows Elise survived and that I'm with her. "What do you want me to do?" Richard made a split-second decision. "Activate Protocol Fortress for my family. And Barbara, contact Diane Porter at the FBI. Tell her I have evidence of kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder involving Marcus Bennett. She'll understand the significance." Diane Porter had been investigating Bennett's financial dealings for years, never able to gather enough evidence for charges against the powerful financier. This could be the break she needed. "Consider it done," Barbara confirmed. "And Richard, be careful." Returning to Elise's room, Richard found her sitting more upright, some color returning to her pale cheeks. "Bennett's people tried to get to Megan," he reported grimly. Alarm flashed across Elise's face. "Is she safe?" "Yes, my security team moved her to a secure location." Richard was struck by Elise's immediate concern for a stepdaughter she had never met. "We need to move quickly. Bennett's getting desperate." Elise nodded. "My apartment, the evidence." "I'll go," Amelia volunteered. "I have a key and know where the safe is." Richard shook his head. "Too dangerous. Bennett might have people watching her place." He turned to Elise. "I've contacted the FBI, an agent who's been building a case against Bennett for years." "Porter," Elise said, surprising him. "I've spoken with her. She has copies of some documents, but not everything." A knock at the door silenced them. One of the security guards entered. "Mr. Harrington, hospital security reports a group of men in suits asking about Ms. Wilson at reception. They're claiming to be federal agents but refuse to show identification." Richard's decision was immediate. "We're moving now. Call for transport to Harrington Tower, secure entrance." Within 30 minutes, they had transferred Elise to a wheelchair. Dr. Taylor had objected strenuously, but relented when Richard explained the potential danger, agreeing to sign release papers on the condition that a private medical team would continue Elise's care. As they navigated the hospital's service corridors toward the loading dock, where Richard's security team waited with an armored SUV, Elise reached for his hand. "I never thought we'd be on the same side again," she said quietly. Richard squeezed her fingers gently. "We should never have been on opposite sides. Bennett orchestrated everything. Grace's supposed death, our separation, the way I betrayed you with the continuum rights." "You had a choice," Elise reminded him, though without the bitterness that might have colored such words years earlier. "I did," Richard acknowledged, "and I made the wrong one. I've regretted it every day since." The loading dock doors opened, revealing Richard's head of security, Kevin, with the vehicle. As Amelia helped Elise into the SUV, Kevin approached Richard. "FBI agent Porter is meeting us at Harrington Tower," he reported. "And sir, Ms. Megan is secure and asking for updates." "Tell her I'm safe and will call her soon," Richard instructed, climbing into the vehicle beside Elise. As they pulled away from the hospital, Richard's phone buzzed with a message from Barbara. Bennett cancelled his meetings. Private jet filed flight plan back to NYC. Leaving in 30 minutes. "He's running," Richard told the others. "We need to move faster." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. At Harrington Tower, Elise was installed in the secure executive suite with medical personnel, while Richard met with FBI agent Porter, providing her with the evidence from both the thumb drive and additional documents Kevin's team had retrieved from Elise's apartment. By evening, the news was reporting Marcus Bennett's arrest at the private airport as he attempted to flee. The charges included kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The business world was in shock at the downfall of one of its most prominent figures. In Richard's private office, he and Elise sat together watching the coverage, the weight of 15 years of separation and lies beginning to lift. "What happens now?" Elise asked softly. "With Sophia?" Richard considered the question carefully. "We approached the Winters family together, explained the situation delicately. Sophia's 15, old enough to understand, but young enough that this will be incredibly disruptive. And Megan, how will you explain to her that she has a sister?" "With honesty," Richard said. "She deserves nothing less." Elise studied his face. "You've changed, Richard. Losing you and Grace changed me. Building a life with half my heart missing changed me." He met her gaze directly. "Success means nothing without the people who matter most. It's not going to be simple," Elise cautioned. 15 years is a long time. We're different people now." "I know," Richard reached for her hand, "but for the first time in 15 years, we have a chance to make things right, for ourselves and for our daughters." 3 months later, Richard stood beside Elise on the deck of his lake house, watching as Megan and Sophia sat at the end of the dock, their feet dangling in the water as they talked quietly. The sisters had met for the first time just 6 weeks earlier, after careful preparation and numerous family therapy sessions. The Winters family had been devastated by the revelation, but ultimately concerned with Sophia's well-being. A complex arrangement had emerged. Sophia would maintain her legal relationship with the only parents she had ever known, while gradually building relationships with her biological parents and sister. "They look comfortable together," Elise observed, leaning slightly against Richard's shoulder. "They have the same laugh," Richard noted, "and they both scrunch their nose when they're concentrating." Elise smiled. "Your genetic contribution." As they watched their daughters, Richard reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. Bennett was awaiting trial. Harrington Tech and Solstice Innovations were exploring a partnership that would honor their original vision for Continuum, and most importantly, a family fractured by greed and manipulation was finding its way toward wholeness. "I never expected a second chance," Richard admitted quietly. "Not after what I did." Elise turned to face him. "Sometimes family finds you when you least expect it." The phrase she had shared with Amelia weeks before the accident now took on new meaning. As Richard gazed at the woman he had lost and found again, and at the daughters who were building a bridge between past and future, he understood that some bonds could never truly be broken, only bent and tested until they found their way back to strength. The family that had been stolen from them 15 years ago was different now, shaped by separate lives and experiences, but it was whole in a way that felt both unexpected and inevitable. As Megan and Sophia's laughter drifted up from the dock, Richard and Elise turned toward the sound, moving forward together into a future neither could have imagined, when a midnight call had shattered the carefully constructed walls between them.
She mistook a millionaire single dad for the school janitor. But that mistake changed everything. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The morning sun spilled across the courtyard of St. Augustine Elementary School, catching on the wet pavement after a light drizzle. The bell had not yet rung, but the halls already hummed with the sound of teachers greeting students, sneakers squeaking, laughter echoing down the corridor. Inside classroom 12, Elena Morgan, a new substitute teacher, was struggling with the banner that kept slipping from the top of the chalkboard. "Stay up, please," she muttered, standing on her tiptoes and stretching the tape as far as it would go. Her ponytail swayed, and a smudge of chalk streaked her cheek. The banner, which read "Kindness is never wasted," drooped again. She sighed and turned, spotting a tall man by the doorway in a gray maintenance uniform, holding a mop. "Oh, thank goodness. Can you help me for just a second?" she asked with relief. The man looked up, surprised. He had broad shoulders, dark hair still damp from the rain, and kind eyes that studied her for a moment. before he nodded silently. Without a word, he crossed the room, took the tape, and fixed the banner neatly against the wall with one swift movement. "Perfect," Elena said, smiling wide. "You must be new here. I have not seen you around before." "Look." He glanced at her, lips curving faintly. "You could say that," he answered. "I am Elena," she said cheerfully, brushing chalk dust off her sleeve. "It is my first week teaching here. I swear everything that can go wrong has already gone wrong. The heater in the teacher's lounge is broken, my markers are dry, and now this banner." Her words tumbled out in a rush, nerves spilling over. The man listened quietly, arms crossed, eyes calm and amused. "Well, the banner looks fine now," he said. His voice carried an ease that steadied her somehow. "Thanks to you, mister?" she prompted. He hesitated, then simply said, "Andrew." "Thank you, Andrew," she replied, still assuming he was the school janitor. "I owe you one." He just smiled and nodded once, glancing at the quote on the banner before walking toward the door. "Kindness is never wasted," he read softly. "That is a good one." Elena laughed lightly. "It is my favorite saying. Children need to be reminded that small acts matter. Sometimes adults do too." Andrew paused at the threshold, his expression unreadable. "You are right about that," he said quietly before leaving the room. For a few seconds, Elena watched the doorway, confused by how composed he seemed, how unlike any janitor she had ever met. Then the bell rang, jolting her back to reality. Students began to rush in, backpacks bouncing, chatter filling the air. By the time she turned back, Andrew was gone. Only the faint scent of rain and a perfect banner remained. Outside, across the courtyard, Andrew Cole walked toward the black sedan waiting near the faculty lot. The driver opened the door for him, but he stopped for a moment, glancing back at classroom 12. Through the window, he could see Elena laughing with the children, her hands moving animatedly as she helped them hang their coats. He smiled faintly. To everyone else, Andrew was Andrew Cole, the founder of the Cole Foundation and the school's most generous benefactor. But this morning, he had simply been a man with a mop, caught off guard by a woman who treated him like a person instead of a headline. And for reasons he could not explain, he found himself wanting to see that banner again. The next morning, the sound of rain against the window pulled Elena from a restless sleep. Her alarm buzzed at 6 o'clock, the cheap digital clock flashing its tired red numbers. She blinked twice, then sat up slowly on the narrow bed of her small one-room apartment. The air smelled faintly of coffee and damp plaster. The roof leaked when it rained, and the bucket beside her desk already held half an inch of water. She rubbed her eyes and exhaled, glancing around the cramped space. A second-hand dresser, a chipped mirror, and a tiny kitchen counter lined with grocery store instant noodles. On the wall hung her one treasure, a sketch of a classroom drawn in pencil, framed by a note in a child's handwriting that said, "Thank you, Miss Elena, for believing in me." She smiled faintly at it before getting ready for another day. Her morning routine was a quiet battle with time. She brewed instant coffee, pulled on her worn navy cardigan, and checked her phone. The notification from the school payroll app blinked on the screen. Temporary contract, 2 weeks remaining. A knot formed in her chest. She had exactly 14 days left to prove herself worthy of a permanent teaching position. 14 days to show she was more than the nervous substitute teacher who spilled chalk dust on her skirt. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and pine. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. She stood in the drizzle, clutching her bag to her chest as cars splashed past. When the bus arrived, it was already crowded. Students, parents, and early commuters pressed together in the narrow aisle. Elena found a spot near the back and stared out the fogged window, her reflection overlapping the gray morning streets of Willow Creek. Her mind replayed yesterday's scene again, the man in the gray uniform, the quiet smile, the way he had read her quote out loud. There had been something about him that did not fit the part of a janitor. The way he carried himself, calm but assured. Still, she pushed the thought aside. "Do not get distracted," she whispered to herself. "You need this job." When she arrived at St. Augustine Elementary School, the parking lot was full of gleaming cars. A silver sedan stopped near the gate, and a child stepped out wearing a designer coat. Elena caught herself comparing her own scuffed shoes to the polished black heels of another teacher who walked by without a greeting. It stung more than she wanted to admit. Inside the faculty room, the chatter was brisk. Teachers huddled in groups, discussing the upcoming Parent Appreciation Gala. Elena poured herself a cup of coffee, avoiding eye contact. A senior teacher named Miss Parker glanced over with a polite but cool smile. "You are the new substitute in classroom 12, right?" she said. "Yes, that is me," Elena replied softly. "Well," Miss Parker said, stirring her drink, "you might want to make a good impression this week. The Cole Foundation is reviewing which classes will keep funding. Their chairman is visiting soon." "The Cole Foundation?" Elena repeated, recognizing the name from the school brochures. "They fund the literacy program, right?" Miss Parker nodded. "And the art scholarships. Big deal around here. You will see him at the gala, Mr. Andrew Cole. He is very private, but when he visits, everyone stands a little straighter." She gave a knowing smirk before walking away. Elena stared at her coffee cup, heart sinking. Another reminder that this place was not built for people like her. Everyone here seemed to belong to the wealth, the polish, the confidence. She was the outsider holding a temporary badge and a second-hand laptop. By mid-morning, she was back in her classroom, guiding her students through multiplication problems. 4 times 6 equals 24, she said, drawing large, clear numbers on the board. The children echoed her answer with sleepy voices. When recess came, she sat at her desk, reviewing lesson plans. The heater groaned again, clicking uselessly. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup from the cafeteria, the paper soft from reuse. Then, from the hallway, she heard the sound of small footsteps in a boy's voice. "Miss Elena?" She looked up. It was Ben Cole, one of her quieter students. His dark hair curled slightly over his forehead. He held out a crumpled piece of paper. "My dad said I should give this to you. He said it is important." Elena smiled kindly and unfolded the paper. Inside was a simple thank you note written in neat adult handwriting. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness is never wasted." Her breath caught for a second. The quote from the banner. The man in the gray uniform. She looked down at the signature, Andrew Cole. The hallway buzzed with distant laughter, but all she could hear was the echo of his voice from yesterday. "That is a good one." Elena set the paper on her desk, heart racing in quiet confusion. She had mistaken him for the janitor, but if her guess was right, he was something else entirely. She looked toward the window. Outside, the sky was clearing, a thin ray of light breaking through the clouds. It fell across the chalkboard, illuminating the words still faintly visible beneath her morning lessons. "Kindness is never wasted." She whispered it again, softly this time, as if testing what it meant now. That evening, long after the last student had gone home, Elena stayed behind to tidy her classroom. The sun was melting into the horizon, pouring gold across the rows of tiny desks. The air smelled faintly of crayons and chalk dust. She stacked notebooks carefully, one by one, humming under her breath to fill the silence. When she reached the board, she noticed the small note again, the one from Andrew Cole. She ran her thumb over the neat handwriting. It was steady, confident, like someone used to signing big decisions. She thought about what Miss Parker had said in the teacher's lounge that morning. The Cole Foundation, the chairman, the one everyone stands straighter for. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "There is no way," she whispered. "That man was holding a mop." Still, her heart would not let go of the thought. The way he had looked at her, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the unspoken amusement, as she thanked him for fixing the banner. She shook her head and erased the board, trying to chase the image away. The next day began like any other. Rain again, puddles reflecting the gray sky. The hallway buzzed with children's voices, backpacks thumping against lockers. Elena was preparing art supplies for her class when the intercom crackled. "Faculty reminder," said the principal's voice. "The Parent Appreciation Gala will be held this Friday evening. All teachers are expected to attend." Elena sighed quietly. A gala. She barely owned one decent dress. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and returned to sorting brushes into jars. That afternoon, Ben lingered after class. "Miss Elena, my dad says he might come by tomorrow," he said, zipping his backpack. "That is wonderful," she replied, smiling. "It will be nice to finally meet him." Ben's eyes lit up. "He liked your quote on the board. He said you remind him of my mom." Then he waved goodbye, leaving Elena speechless. When the final bell rang, the school emptied again. Elena gathered her lesson plans and stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Down the corridor, she heard someone speaking softly. "Excuse me," she called, turning the corner. There he was. Andrew Cole stood near the trophy case, still dressed simply, this time in a button-down shirt and jeans. He was talking to the principal, who seemed both nervous and honored in his presence. Elena froze, the realization hitting her like a wave. He is not the janitor. He is the Andrew Cole. The principal noticed her and smiled stiffly. "Miss Morgan! Perfect timing. Mr. Cole was just asking about your classroom. He visited yesterday with his son." Elena's cheeks warmed. "Yes, we met." Briefly. Andrew turned, his expression unreadable but gentle. "We did," he said. "You were wrestling with a banner." She laughed weakly, embarrassed. "So, you saw that." "I did," he said, eyes glinting with amusement. "You have a good message on that board. Kindness is never wasted. It stuck with me." The principal excused himself, leaving them alone. Elena tried to steady her voice. "I owe you an apology," she began. "I thought you were a janitor," he finished, smiling faintly. "You are not the first person to think that." "I am so sorry," she said quickly. "I would never have—" He raised a hand, stopping her. "Please, do not apologize. It was refreshing. People usually talk to me for what I can give them, not because they actually want to talk." The honesty in his tone surprised her. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the hallway quiet except for the faint hum of the vending machine. "You must be very proud of Ben," she said softly. "I am," Andrew replied, his gaze softening. "He has been through a lot since his mother passed. Teaching has not been easy for him, but he likes your class. He says you make him feel safe." Her chest tightened. "He is a wonderful boy, smart, curious, kind. You should be proud." "I am," he repeated, almost to himself. Silence settled again, gentle and unhurried. Finally, Andrew glanced at the clock. "I have to go, but I wanted to thank you properly. You reminded me that kindness still matters, even in places where people forget." Before she could respond, he extended his hand. She shook it, her fingers brushing his. His palm was warm, steady. "Good evening, Miss Morgan," he said quietly. "Good evening, Mr. Cole," she replied. As he walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing softly, Elena stood frozen, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about him had shifted. She looked back toward her classroom door, where the faint chalk line of her quote still glowed under the flickering lights. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir, hope, curiosity, maybe something more. Outside, the rain had stopped. The puddles on the playground reflected the fading sky, and in that reflection, she could almost see the words forming again in her mind. Kindness is never wasted. And now she knew it was not just a lesson for the children, it was a reminder for her too. Friday evening arrived, and the school that usually smelled of crayons and floor polish now glowed like a ballroom. White string lights wound up the columns, and the gymnasium floor gleamed under the chandeliers borrowed from a local event company. Teachers and parents filled the space in clusters, balancing paper cups of punch and polite conversation. Elena stood near the entrance, her palms slightly damp, clutching the strap of her small handbag. She wore a simple navy dress borrowed from her neighbor, the hem slightly frayed but pressed carefully. She had debated skipping the gala altogether, but duty and curiosity had won. She wanted to see if Andrew Cole would actually be here. Miss Parker spotted her first. "Miss Morgan, you clean up nicely," she said, her tone half compliment, half surprise. "Try to relax. The chairman's table is up front. And remember, appearances matter tonight." Elena smiled politely, trying to hide her discomfort. The hall buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses. On the far side of the room, a small stage had been set for speeches. The banner across the backdrop read, "Parent Appreciation Gala, sponsored by the Cole Foundation." She felt her heart skip a beat at the sight of the name. Then, through the crowd, she saw him. Andrew stood near the stage, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that somehow made him look both commanding and completely at ease. He was speaking with the principal, listening attentively while others hovered nearby, waiting for their chance to greet him. For a moment, Elena forgot to breathe. He looked nothing like the man with the mop she had met days ago. His presence filled the room effortlessly. Yet when his gaze lifted and found hers across the crowd, he smiled quiet, genuine, the same way he had in her classroom. Elena froze. She was not sure if she should approach or pretend she had not seen him. Before she could decide, the principal tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight we honor the families who make St. Augustine Elementary School such a special community. And of course, we extend our deepest gratitude to the Cole Foundation for their continued support." Polite applause followed. The principal turned toward Andrew. "Please welcome our chairman, Mr. Andrew Cole." The crowd erupted again, and Andrew stepped onto the stage. His expression remained calm, his voice steady. "Thank you," he began. "When my late wife and I founded the Cole Foundation, our dream was simple: to make sure every child felt seen and supported, no matter where they came from. This school is proof that kindness builds stronger communities than competition ever could." Elena felt her throat tighten at his words. Every syllable carried sincerity, not the polished distance she had expected from a millionaire. After the speech, the crowd began to disperse into conversation again. Elena wandered to the refreshment table, her nerves tugging at her resolve. She picked up a cup of punch, then heard his voice behind her. "Miss Morgan." She turned. Andrew stood just a few feet away, the noise of the crowd fading as he approached. "You made it," he said. "I almost did not," she admitted with a shy smile. "Crowds are not really my thing." "They are not mine either," he said quietly. "But I am glad you came." They found themselves beside a display of student artwork. One painting caught his eye, a watercolor of a sunrise, bright and clumsy, signed Ben Cole, age 7. "He painted this," Andrew said, pride softening his tone. "He did," Elena replied. "He told me he misses his mom in the mornings. So we painted sunrises that day." Andrew looked at her for a long moment. "You see, my son," he said simply. "Not many people do." Elena's cheeks warmed. Every child deserves to be seen. The music shifted to a slow melody. Parents and teachers began to move toward the center of the floor. Andrew hesitated, then extended his hand slightly. "Would you dance?" Elena blinked in surprise. "Here? Now?" He smiled. "Only if you want to." For a moment, she hesitated. Then she placed her hand in his. They moved slowly, almost uncertainly, beneath the soft light. Around them, the laughter and chatter blurred into a distant hum. When the song ended, he released her hand gently. "Thank you," he said, "for treating me like a person when you thought I was a janitor." Elena laughed softly. "You are welcome. And for what it is worth, I think you make a very convincing one." He chuckled, a sound low and genuine. Then someone called his name, and he turned reluctantly toward the stage again. As he walked away, Elena felt something shift inside her. The line between admiration and something deeper was beginning to blur. She looked around the glowing room, her reflection shimmering in the polished floor. For the first time that night, she felt she belonged not because of status or appearance, but because of the quiet truth she shared with the man who believed kindness could still change the world. The weekend after the gala, the halls of St. Augustine Elementary School returned to their usual rhythm. The glitter had been swept away, the banners taken down, and life went on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Elena, everything felt a little different. She found herself replaying the evening in her mind the way Andrew's hand had felt steady in hers, the warmth in his eyes when he spoke about Ben, the quiet way he had thanked her before slipping back into the crowd. She had gone home that night smiling for no reason, and for the first time in months, she had woken up without dread pressing on her chest. By Monday morning, the sky was bright and clear. Children ran across the courtyard laughing, their winter scarves trailing like ribbons in the wind. Inside her classroom, Elena was rearranging the art supplies when a small knock came at the door. Ben stood there, grinning. "Miss Elena, Dad said I can stay after class today to help clean up the art room," he said eagerly. She smiled. "That is very kind of you, Ben, but you do not have to." "I want to," he insisted. "He said it is important to help people who help you." Her heart softened. "In that case, I would love your help." That afternoon, when the final bell rang and the other students hurried out, Ben stayed behind. Together they washed brushes, stacked watercolor trays, and wiped paint from the tables. The air was filled with the faint scent of soap and tempera paint. As they worked, Ben began talking about his father, how he traveled often for work, how he tried to make breakfast every Sunday morning, and how the pancakes always came out uneven. Elena laughed, listening carefully. "He misses your mom a lot, doesn't he?" she asked gently. Ben nodded, eyes thoughtful. "He does. Sometimes he sits by the window and talks to her picture. He thinks I do not see him, but I do." "Oh." The words pierced something in Elena's chest. She reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "You are a good son, Ben. Your mom would be very proud of you." A few moments later, there was a knock at the door. Andrew stood there, one hand in his pocket, his tie loosened after a long day. "So this is where my son disappeared to," he said lightly. "I hope he has not made too much of a mess." "Actually," Elena said with a smile, "he has been my best helper." Ben beamed. "We are done, Dad. Can we get ice cream?" Andrew nodded. "We can, but only if Miss Elena joins us." She hesitated, glancing between father and son. "Oh, I could not possibly." "Please?" Ben pleaded. "You can get strawberry. Dad always gets vanilla. It is boring." Andrew laughed softly. "He is not wrong." Elena gave in with a smile. "All right, but just one scoop." They walked together to a small ice cream shop across from the park. The sun hung low, tinting the sky a soft orange. Ben ran ahead to choose flavors, leaving Elena and Andrew a few paces behind. "I think you have a new favorite teacher," Andrew said quietly. "I think I have a new favorite student," she replied. He looked at her then, not as a parent or a benefactor, but as a man seeing someone he had not expected to meet. "You are good with him," he said. "Better than most." She shook her head. "Ben makes it easy. He just needed someone to listen." Andrew nodded slowly. "We all do, sometimes." They reached the shop window, where Ben was already waving 2 dripping cones in the air. Elena laughed, and Andrew's eyes softened again. For a brief, perfect moment, the world felt simple, 3 people standing in the fading light, laughter spilling into the street. Neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it. Something real was beginning to grow. Something built not on wealth or status, but on quiet understanding, and the kind of kindness that truly is never wasted. The following week arrived with a burst of sunshine after days of winter gray. The city seemed softer somehow, as if the world itself had taken a long, deep breath. At St. Augustine Elementary School, the air buzzed with news. The local newspaper was featuring a story about the Cole Foundation's work with the district. Teachers chatted excitedly in the hallway, speculating about the article and what it might say about the school's funding. Elena had not thought much about it. Her days had been full and content, morning lessons, afternoon laughter, and small moments that warmed her heart. She had even begun sketching again in the evenings, something she had not done since college. Her favorite subject lately was a simple one. A boy holding his father's hand, walking beneath a banner that read, "Kindness is never wasted." But that peaceful rhythm shattered on Thursday morning. She had just started class when the principal hurried in, holding a folded newspaper. His expression was tense. "Miss Morgan," he said. "May I have a moment?" The children exchanged curious looks as Elena followed him into the hallway. He handed her the paper without a word. Across the front page was a headline. Philanthropist Andrew Cole announces expansion of education initiative. Below it was a large photo taken at the gala. Andrew standing on stage, and right beside him, caught mid-laughter, was Elena. Her breath caught. The caption read, "Mr. Cole seen sharing a moment with a teacher rumored to have inspired his latest project." Her stomach twisted. "Rumored?" she repeated. The principal sighed. "I am afraid some people are. Talking. A few parents called this morning, asking about your relationship with Mr. Cole. You know how people are when it comes to gossip." Elena felt her face burn. There is nothing inappropriate. He is just—" "I know, Miss Morgan," the principal interrupted gently. "You have done nothing wrong. But the board is very cautious about appearances. For now, it might be best to keep some distance until things settle." She nodded, throat tight. When she returned to her classroom, the children were whispering. Someone had already pulled up the article on a phone. She forced a smile and began the next lesson, but her voice trembled. After school, she walked home through the drizzle, her umbrella forgotten somewhere along the way. She could not stop seeing that photo, the easy laughter, the warmth in his eyes. Something that had felt so simple was now being twisted into scandal. That evening, her phone buzzed. It was Andrew. "Elena," he said quietly when she answered. "I just saw the article. I am so sorry. I never wanted this to affect you." She hesitated, staring at the raindrops on her window. "They think I used you," she whispered. "They think I am some kind of opportunist." "You are not," he said firmly. "Anyone who knows you would never believe that." "But they do not know me," she replied, "and I cannot afford to lose this job." There was silence on the line. Then Andrew spoke softly. "I will fix this. I promise." "Please do not," she said quickly. "If you do anything, it will only make things worse. Just let it fade." He exhaled, defeated. "All right, but for what it is worth, I do not regret any of it." Elena closed her eyes. "Neither do I." When the call ended, she stood there for a long time, the city lights flickering beyond the rain. Somewhere inside, she knew the truth was catching up to them. The kindness that had brought them together was now being tested in the harsh light of judgment, and soon, the world would see who Andrew Cole really was. By Monday morning, the storm had grown louder. The photo from the gala had spread beyond the local paper and onto social media. Parents whispered in the parking lot, and teachers exchanged careful looks in the lounge. What had once been a harmless evening of laughter was now painted as scandal. Elena walked into her classroom and felt the shift immediately. Conversations hushed when she passed. A few students' parents had already requested classroom transfers. She kept her head high, pretending not to notice, but inside her stomach twisted with shame she did not deserve. That afternoon, the principal called her into his office. He looked weary, his hands folded on the desk. "Miss Morgan," he began gently, "you are an excellent teacher, but the board is pressuring me. They want to avoid controversy." She felt her throat close. "Are you saying I am being dismissed?" "Just placed on leave," he said softly. "Until things clear up, you will still be paid for the next 2 weeks." Her voice cracked. "2 weeks?" He sighed. "I am truly sorry." When she left the office, the hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, the laughter of children echoing from a world she no longer belonged to. She packed her belongings in silence, chalk, notebooks, the small frame drawing that said, "Thank you, Miss Elena." She lingered for a long moment by the board, where her favorite words were still written faintly in white dust. Kindness is never wasted. As she erased them, her hands trembled. Outside, the sky had turned gray again. Rain began to fall just as she stepped through the school gate. A black sedan pulled up beside the curb. Andrew stepped out, holding an umbrella. "Elena," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Why did you not tell me? I just heard about the suspension." She shook her head, eyes wet. "Because there is nothing you can do. The more you defend me, the more they will think I need saving. You should not have to face this alone," he said firmly. "I do not want your pity, Andrew," she snapped, then immediately softened. "I am sorry. I worked so hard to be here. I thought I finally found where I belonged." He took a step closer. "You still do. You belong where people see your heart." She looked away, fighting tears. "That is not this place." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain fell harder, drumming against the umbrella, washing the color from the world around them. Finally, she whispered, "Maybe this was all a mistake." Andrew's expression tightened. "You do not mean that." "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "You and I come from different worlds. I cannot be the reason your reputation suffers." Before he could answer, she turned and walked away, the rain soaking through her coat. Andrew stood frozen, watching her disappear down the street. That night, he sat alone in his office, overlooking the city skyline, the glow of the lights reflecting in the glass. On his desk lay the same newspaper clipping that had started it all. He stared at the photo, Elena laughing beside him, and felt a hollow ache in his chest. For years, he had been surrounded by people who praised his success, but never spoke to his soul. And just when he had found someone who did, he had lost her to the noise of gossip and fear. In the quiet, his phone buzzed with a message from his son. "Dad," Miss Elena said, "kindness is never wasted. Does that mean we will see her again?" Andrew typed slowly, his eyes stinging. "Yes, Ben, I promise." He closed his eyes and made a vow to himself. If kindness truly was never wasted, then he would prove it no matter what it cost. A week later, the annual Spring of Hope charity event filled the downtown art center with laughter, music, and camera flashes. It was a night dedicated to celebrating the Cole Foundation's newest scholarship program, a project Andrew had quietly named the Kindness Initiative. The press had been buzzing about it for days, speculating what inspired such a heartfelt campaign from the usually reserved millionaire. Elena knew nothing about the event. She had been spending her days quietly, applying for new teaching positions, trying not to think about what she had lost. Her small apartment was filled with silence and unanswered questions. Until that evening, when a letter arrived in her mailbox. It was printed on thick ivory paper, embossed with gold. Dear Miss Morgan, you are warmly invited to attend the unveiling of a special educational project this Saturday at 7 o'clock in the evening. Your presence would mean the world. There was no signature, but she knew exactly who had sent it. Her heart pounded as she stood outside the art center that night. The hall glowed with soft light and the quiet hum of anticipation. Guests mingled beneath tall banners that read, "The Kindness Initiative, a Legacy of Learning." She slipped inside, uncertain, and stayed near the back of the crowd. Then the lights dimmed. Andrew stepped onto the stage. He looked calm, composed, his voice steady through the microphone. Tonight, he said, we celebrate more than numbers or donations. We celebrate the people who remind us that kindness, no matter how small, can change everything. This program was inspired by someone who taught me that the truest generosity asks for nothing in return. A large curtain behind him lifted, revealing a painting Elena's own sketch from her classroom wall. It showed a child and a teacher standing under the words, "Kindness is never wasted." Gasps filled the room. A plaque beneath the painting read, "The Elena Morgan Scholarship for Compassion in Education." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as Andrew continued. Because of her, hundreds of students will now have the chance to learn, to dream, and to be seen for who they are. He looked out over the crowd, and then his gaze found hers. "Miss Morgan," he said softly into the microphone, "thank you for reminding me what truly matters." "Oh." The audience turned, following his eyes until they found her standing near the back, motionless and overwhelmed. Applause rose around her like a tide. For the first time in weeks, she smiled through her tears. The kindness she had thought was lost had come full circle, and it was shining brighter than ever. When the applause finally faded, Andrew stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted as he walked toward her, the soft hum of the string quartet filling the air. Elena stood frozen near the edge of the hall, her heart pounding with every step he took. "You should not have done this," she whispered when he reached her. "You did not have to use my name." "I wanted to," he said simply. "It was never about publicity. It was about setting the record straight. You lost your job because you stood up for kindness. I could not let the world forget that." She shook her head, tears threatening to spill again. "Andrew, you risked everything for me." "No," he smiled softly. "No, you reminded me what everything was for." The room had quieted, guests pretending not to watch. He took her hand gently, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Ben misses you. He keeps asking if Miss Elena will come back." Her lips trembled. "I miss him too." "Then come back," Andrew said. "Not just to teach, but to stay. The foundation board has reinstated your position. You have your classroom again if you still want it." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "How did you—" "Because the truth has a way of finding light," he said. "And so do you." For a moment, the world seemed to blur the lights, the murmurs, the music. All she could see was the man who had once held a mop in his hand and a quiet strength in his eyes. She laughed softly through her tears. "You know, when I met you, I thought you were the janitor. And you treated me better than most people treat a millionaire," he said, smiling. "That is how I knew." "Oh." He reached into his pocket and revealed a small silver pendant shaped like a chalkboard. Engraved on it were the words, "Kindness is never wasted." "I had this made for you," he said. A reminder of how it all began. Elena's fingers closed around it gently. "It is beautiful." "It is true," he replied. "Every word." At that moment, Ben ran up to them from the crowd, holding a small bouquet of daisies. Miss Elena, are you coming back to class? She knelt to his level, tears glistening. Yes, Ben, I am coming home. Andrew placed a hand on her shoulder. Then let us start over together. She nodded, smiling through the emotion that tightened her chest. As the music swelled, Andrew wrapped his arm around her, and together they looked up at the painting, the same words shining above them like a promise. Kindness is never wasted. It was no longer just a quote on a classroom wall. It was their story born from a mistake, redeemed by truth, and sealed by love that asked for nothing but honesty in return. And for the first time, Elena Morgan believed in forever.